Okay, so I have some of my simple shapes here. And you can, and look, there's other things that you can build, right? Like you can, so now we have this sense of building cylinders, right? You could build cones, right? But you have to know exactly where that circle, where that center is. And of course, the tips of all the cones, now we're working hard to make these all the same, right? The tips of all those cones would all line up and meet the same point. So yeah, now the goal of all of this is for you to get comfortable and to build usable rules for yourself, like to say, you know what, I know exactly how this would look. I know exactly how to find the center. Now this is a little bit odd, right? Because you have to draw that circle for the base. You just have to draw through it to understand it. We're using the same construction line. You can see really clearly that it makes perfect sense. That's a little bit off horizontal. It's okay. Cool. And you can see how it progresses really unexpectedly, right? It goes, the cones get really small. Everything when you draw in perspective, it gets a lot smaller than you think it should get. But you get to the point where you don't need the ruler so much, right? You can just sort of, you can say like, oh, I see how this is going. And because of atmospheric perspective, you couldn't see it anyway. So you can make that blurry, right? Perfect. And then for a really challenging one, try to progress some spheres back in space too. So these are some bases that we used. So I'm just going to imagine, I have kind of an idea of where the center of everything is, right? I can draw some centers. And then I mark the center of each object, and I draw just a horizontal axis, and that will help me construct a sphere. You can see it's a little bit off, but I have this little rule in mind that everything has to be, everything has to move up kind of evenly. Cool. Say the sphere is about this big, and that line, I can connect to my perspective point. Right? So I can see that is the top of the sphere. It's the top, that's the top, that's the top, and that's the base, 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 right? So now, even though it seems easy, I have to, control my line and try to get a perfect sphere out of my hand, which I can do if I don't use my fingers. So see how my fingers are locked and I'm drawing with my whole arm? That is the secret to drawing a perfect sphere. A perfect circle, you can do it. You have to do it, you have to go around a few times before you get the feeling of it. But the joint of your shoulder has a sphere. Your fingers don't. Your forearms do not have a sphere. Paying attention to the other ones and paying attention to the logic of the progression. It's okay if I got a lot of pencil lines. And it's okay if stuff is imperfect, right? Okay, so here's the pencil structure of the drawing. I have shapes progressing back in space, and you can see how the shapes kind of cover over each other. So maybe that's not that interesting. So when you're drawing your initial squares for the base, you could do every other one. You could say, this is one square, and then I'll skip one, and then this is the same square over here, right? And then you could use those as kind of your concepts of creating bases for these shapes, and do so. So you saw me do ones that I really carefully constructed, right? I tried to make the sphere the same size. I lined up the cone. I found where the line for their points would be. I found the central axis of each cone, etc. But also, these are valuable too, where you're just intuiting it, right? Like, oh, I see these two things are the same size, but they're going back in space. I have a basic guideline here, but I'm just mostly relying on my intuition. And I'm saying, that looks a little too big, right? So that, I think, should be about there. And just feeling that's what'll be valuable in your development, is just being able to have those feelings. That is looking right to me, and if it's not right, it's over the threshold. It's good enough, right? So in this assignment, you have 1 point perspective. You are constructing bases for geometric objects that you imagine, and you are progressing them back into space and making them realistic. Now, the other thing I want to emphasize is that, and I'm going to do a little of it. Let me just find my brush here. You shouldn't be turning in pencil. You should be thinking about everything that we've already learned and trying to integrate everything and bring it forward. So in terms of atmospheric perspective, I'm going to say my light is here, right? This is really bright. So this is going to go to total white. And then in my entire composition, I'm going to say that this is light, right? This is mediumish. This is darkish. And this is close to black, right? Or however you mark that. Now we've already done a bunch of ways of creating this. Mediumish, darkish, black, right? Just to have a plan. Last time when I was doing my Mos Eisley spaceport, I think those values are really too simplified, and I was really having trouble putting detail back into it. So I'm going to say don't tone them, like don't make this all black, make this all dark, because your piece might end up a little bit too dark too quickly, right? But just work carefully and have that idea that you're going from dark to light, right? Like on the exterior it's dark. And you guys are just so good with the brush that, gosh, everything you've been learning you can bring together, right? Oh, I don't know if that was exactly right. Okay, but it's over the threshold, and this guy is going to be dark. Try to do some of those beautiful things I've seen in your drawings. I know that it'll be light up here and darker here. So whatever texture, like make a texture that clings to the outside. It's totally free. But just make sure that it gets light as it goes towards the top. Try to keep this line really light. Cool, right? Just go slowly. Know that all your definition the things that sort of the The things in your hand that make your line wobbly also make this look more real, right? That's just a shadow. Now, right, cool. So I'm gonna start doing some tone, just because I really want to emphasize, but I'm gonna be a little more careful than my Mos Eisley drawing, because I don't want it to get too out of control, right? Oh, that's really good. Actually, this whole thing can pretty much be toned. Just showing its position in space. The light's on the wrong side, but it doesn't really matter because light can kind of bounce around. All right, so now this one. Now I trust my structure. Right, it's pretty simple, but I know that it's sound in terms of space and geometry, and I know that I'm developing a really good sense of atmospheric perspective too. All that matters is that I'm getting lighter as I go back, right? That's it. So maybe this one, I'll let some of that darkness be on the base, but leave the top free. I'm not washing over the whole thing to begin with, because that was kind of problematic for my other drawing, and I couldn't achieve what I wanted except by taking it into a digital world. So instead of that, I'm just sort of being intuitive about the light, knowing that stuff has to get lighter as it goes back, and also making these shapes a little more indistinct as they go back. Cool. So if I try to match that sense of darkness on everything, I'm confident about the structure. The structure is well engineered, so I want the light to be, not structural. I want the light to be playful and work its way over the surface, right? This is the brush pen that you guys probably have. Yeah, just use it for everything. If you want to make a straight line, I had this professor that says to hold your breath, take a deep breath, and you can make a straight line. Have fun with it. You guys have developed, your own textures, your own approach. So see how those textures can fit into this idea of making things darker as they go back. I think there's something imperfect about the line. Like my line never matches the engineering sense of the pencil. it's always always sort of changing thicknesses, and always you're sort of dealing with that surface. But that's why the line is more powerful than a pencil. You know, the pencil does the engineering, and then you're free to explore it with the lines and the wash. This is my area that's going to be totally black. I can get some cool bleed effects in there with the ink. This should be dark, that should be medium. So I'm trying to capitalize on that and make it as sort of natural and expressive as possible. Okay, but in all those outer areas, I needed to go all the way to black. Otherwise, the atmospheric perspective won't work right. Right? I have to control it. I can't let it all of a sudden let up and be brighter on the edge. Because that's sort of the rule that I set for myself in this world. And light is always directional. So everything here will be darker. You know, and it's so nice because I've just already gone through my structural phase. You know, I don't need to work on it again, and now I can sort of think about the emotion of the light. Cool. Gosh, I love how that looks. Looks really nice. And you know, and I also have this incredible confidence in the realism of the space. If I leave this white on the corner, I'm just breaking the world. So even, you know, I mean, there's this thing about, oh, I don't want to use all this ink. I don't want to paint this for no reason. You are, you know, you're showing that your world is realistic. And once you are able to do that, then you're able to, then you have freedom. Then you have freedom to express yourself within that world. So, so that is the trade-off, is, you know, that this actually exists, even if it's in this in-between space of the real and the unreal, that you have earned its reality, and then you can be wild and expressive and sort of say whatever you want. Okay, so I'm not actually going to finish this because I don't want my video to be 2 hours long, but you get the idea. And also, I want you to know that, you know, my background is painting, and so I love painting with ink. I think it looks cool, but there are plenty of ways to create. Remember that first assignment when you guys were doing your separate textures? You do not have to be brushing ink all over your pages all the time, right? I just kind of do it because it's fast and I like it. But if you just think about, you know, this, if you establish that atmospheric perspective that it's going to go from light to dark, then you might do it, you know, with shading or cross hatching, right? So here I'm just using a pen, I'm just using lines, and I'm going to, just sort of compound my lines until they get dark enough, right? Then I would go back to, this one would simply have less lines on it. So I don't want you to think that, whatever I'm doing is exactly what is right for you, because you can get a lot of beautiful effects. And maybe you never use the brush, maybe you only ever use some of your pen, right? And you just think about creating these lines, and you find other ways to go from light to dark, right? That's kind of back to that first discovering textures assignment, which everyone did a great job on. You just, you built up a bunch of textures, so use them, whatever they are. They don't have to be painted textures. Like I like to do ink paintings, and that suits me. But it can be whatever texture you want to build up the feeling of this space, right? Yeah, and then, gosh, this is fun. The light source is there, right? So then the inside edge would be bright. So there's an example of like how to shade something without a wash. If you just look at that little sphere that I made. I'm not really using a wash, but it has a sense of direction in the light. This is furthest away from the light. Everything is circular. So that's working. You still have that sense of light changing, right? This is going to be lighter. It's going to have the same structure. It's going to be even lighter. It's so close to the light that it doesn't have any shadows. Maybe just a little. Right? So you can see that whatever techniques you're using, you can, as long as you have that structure of what you're doing, you can get there using anything, right? You have atmospheric perspective, you have 1-point linear perspective, you have everything you need, and then all of these tools just allow you to be creative and draw how you want to. Not adding detail is something too, saying, it's far away, I can't see it, but it's still right. Cool. All right, so I hope that's clear. It's simple primitives in 1-point perspective. Your drawing should have a sense of atmosphere, which means light to dark, and you can use any texture that you want to achieve it. But what we're really looking for is that these objects are the same size and they progress back in space rationally, and that it makes sense, right? So see the order of my cones. This looks right. It looks like the same cone going back into space, right? If all of a sudden you have something like this, where it obviously sticks out, like see the base is too big, it doesn't make sense with the rest of it, and you're just kind of fudging it, or maybe you have a cone that's like flat on bottom or something like that. You can tell when the space starts to break, right? I mean, you get to a point where it's sort of like, you pretty much got it. You've done a good job with making these squares, and progressing them back. They're pretty much there, right? You just cross the threshold, and your intuition is guiding you, right? It doesn't matter. Maybe some engineer somewhere in the world could take a ruler, project these distances, and make a convincing argument that this ball was not right in comparison to this ball, but essentially it doesn't matter, right? You cross the threshold of reality. This looks correct spatially, and this is doing pretty well. So that's it. So the assignment is 1 point perspective. It should be linear. It should be constructed with a ruler. It should show correct progression of these sort of square surfaces using diagonals to make them right. And then on top of those square surfaces, you should build series of simple primitives. Spheres, cylinders, cones, blocks. I haven't done my blocks yet. And then you should also show me that whatever you're doing is going from light to dark or dark to light. Either light at the center and dark at the outside, or dark in the center and light at the outside, whatever you choose. But you have to hold all those things in your mind simultaneously, right? Like the correct perspective and the correct light. And if you can get light and perspective to work together and get to the point where you say, okay, I get how this works, then it'll function for you very well. But what's more powerful, like, see what I'm doing here? That's basically the same size. I don't need to check it with the ruler. I can sort of do this freehand, right? That's right. That's good enough, right? Once you sort of establish the reality of your drawing, then the reality just takes over and it becomes really convincing. And the goal is to just cross that threshold, so you don't have to work as hard, and so you don't have to over-engineer everything. But wow, that looks pretty good when you step back from it. So yeah, so I'm not finishing mine, but you should finish yours. Get it, fully rendered out with the way that you want to communicate light and space. Render all the shapes, paint the whole thing if you're painting it. You can have other textures where you are, covering the whole thing with line if you're working that way. And we are just progressing these simple primitives back into space, right? So I hope that gives you a clear idea. It's basically the same as your schema assignment, but just with a sense of distance, right? And knowing how to make that distance logical and repeatable.